If it's not Riven, it's going to be miscellaneous cards. And then tomorrow we're going to find out whether it's Shyvana or Victor. Actually, it's not Victor. I mean, okay, let's... Look, alright guys, it's out. Reveal's here. Let's go. Let's see it. Where are we at? It's the Noxcrea Arena. Huh? Noxcrea. 5 mana landmark. Round end, your strongest ally and the weakest enemy strike each other. That's kind of cool. Your strongest ally and the weakest enemy strike each other. God, it's hard to imagine that. That's not bad, actually. That's one of the better ones, right? It's a 5 mana single combat. It's like a 5 mana single combat every turn, which, when you think about it, is remarkably close to Tahm Kench. Yeah, it's one of the better ones. It is definitely one of the better ones. You can... God, what are we going to do with that? It feels hard to make reliable, but there have to be a few ways. I mean, it's good with Garen, right? It's good with something like Garen or something like Trundle. Nox Demacia has always felt kind of close as a, you know, deck type. Maybe we could actually run this with you know, some of those cards. It feels like we'll have to think more about that. Scorched Earth, whoa. What the hell is that? Kill a damaged unit or destroy a landmark. So this is basically like a Noxian Guillotine that, instead of being able to echo itself and create more copies, just has the subclause of being able to destroy a landmark. It's a 3 mana flock. Kind of. For the most part, I do think destroy a landmark in the current... So what I expect to happen is that a lot of people are going to run landmarks for the first couple of days or week, because obviously they're new and people are going to experiment. These cards are definitely going to mess with that in the first early days. If you want to win a lot of games, I do think it's worth running like 1 or 2 copies of these cards in the first few days of the patch, because you will see a lot of landmarks. I do think overall, most of the landmarks are non-competitive. There will maybe be one that ends up sticking on a, you know, competitive level, and we'll see it a decent amount. And in that case, we might end up seeing a lot of these like tech cards. To be perfectly honest, though, we've already seen 2 kind of counter cards to these landmarks, 2 hate cards, and honestly, even without those, the landmarks felt a little awkward. So yeah, not looking great for the landmarks. Stony Suppressor, 2 mana 1/3, all spells cost 1 more. Holy shit! That's a crazy card! What the hell? Yo! What? Alright, this is a fucking tech card. Jesus Christ. That is a tech card. God damn. And it's in Demacia. Galio next? What the hell is Galio? I feel like you guys are making some of these champ names up. I've never heard of any of this shit. Dude, that's pretty crazy. So, you know, this is a card in Demacia. And Demacia is part of the reason why this card is so strong, right? Or I don't know exactly how strong it'll be, but at the very least, it's very good at doing what its job is, right? In Demacia, you know, maybe you don't run a lot of spells, and if you run this card in your deck, well, you're really gonna fuck some decks like Lee Sin. Like, they will have to kill this immediately. Like, really, really, really immediately. And, you know, I mean, Lee Sin, he can come out maybe and kick it, but even in that best case scenario, like, even if this card is going to die on, like, turn 5 or something to Lee Sin, if you play this on 2, that's still going to mess up a deck like that, usually. It still will... 15 mana War Mothers? Yeah, it makes War Mothers, like, impossible to cast. Like, this is such a crazy card. And Demacia really just doesn't need to use spells. It just doesn't need to use spells. This is a cool card. I do like this card, especially in something like a tournament format where you have like a lot more control over like what the opponent is going to be playing based on, you know, predictions, based on bans. A card like this could be really, really, really powerful. Sharp Sight. Give an ally +2/+2, and I can block units with elusive this round. So they're not going to print a keyword for blocking units with elusive. In Magic the Gathering, we had Reach. That was basically a flying blocker. But basically, it's a 2-mana burst spell that gives 2/2 and a little bit of a bonus. When you think about it, it's pretty similar to Transfusion. This is a Demacian card. So it's a combat trick that it's kind of like Radiant Strike. It's like the big brother of Radiant Strike. You can think about it kind of similarly to Transfusion. It looks so Noxus. It looks really fucking Noxus. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't realize it was Demacia at first just because of the, you know, the art and the color scheme. But yeah, this is a Demacia card. +2/+2 is huge. Yeah, I mean, Transfusion was pretty good in the past, and this is Transfusion without the arguable downside of dealing 1 damage. Transfusion was run competitively in a lot of decks where it was used with deal 1 damage as the downside, right? Which is pretty cool. So overall, this is definitely a solid card. It functions decently as like a potential tech card against some kind of elusives as well. What elusives are in the meta right now? Like, even if elusive decks aren't in the meta, there's always like, there's stuff like Zap Sprayfin right now. Lounging Lizard will be fairly popular. There's always like, you'll see some random otters flying around. So it's not just a +2/+2. It's like a Transfusion, but if you remove the downside and give it an upside too. Man, I gotta say, this is a pretty good card. This is a pretty powerful card. I think this card will see play for a while, and it still will come and go. It might be hard to fit into decks. Like, Demacia can have a pretty hard time fitting in spells, because Demacia has a lot of good units and a lot of good spells, and usually they're very, very tight on their deck slots. I do like this card. I think it'll fit in decks. I suspect this card will see a lot of play, and then in probably like a few weeks or a month, like a longer time, it'll start like seeing like trims. Stalking Broodmother. Okay, so I mean, it really looks like it's super confirmed Shyvana. A lot of you guys that might have been more familiar with the lore might have been able to guess that earlier, but this looks like it's Shyvana, boys. I mean, it looks like that's what we're getting tomorrow. 7 mana, 6/6 Fury Scout, and it's a dragon, and it can attack twice, and you can potentially ramp into it with a little dragon lady. This one's not great. As far as dragons go, this is one of the weaker ones. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if the dragon synergy is good, you can run anything that has the dragon tag. We'll really have to see. I do think, like, yeah, some of the other dragons were better. Like, the 4 mana and 5 mana one were probably better. When I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, grant me Challenger. So, a potential 2 mana 3/2 Challenger. You're not going to be able to get Challenger on turn 2, which does matter a lot. Challenger on turn 2 can do a lot of things. It can really mess with, like, that can just absolutely ass blast certain cards like Eye of the Dragon. Shyvana's in the art. Oh, is that Shyvana? Move cam. Alright, guys. That is Shyvana. Dragon Guard Lieutenant. When I'm summoned, if you behold a dragon, grant me Challenger. How are we evaluating this card? Well, it's going to be a deck with pretty high synergy, and unless there's a 1 mana dragon, and even if there is, I don't know if you'd play a lot of cards that are like 1 mana dragons. I feel like this card actually might not make the cut in dragon decks, which looks pretty... Or, sorry, it's Behold. Sorry, that was a brain aneurysm. I just messed up. Obviously, you can get the Challenger on turn 2. All you have to do is have a dragon in hand, because Behold is in hand. Forgot what game we were playing for a second. So basically, it's always going to be a 2 mana 3/2 Challenger. You can probably slow down some of the early game with this. That's a pretty solid card. It's a pretty solid card. So the way dragons are going to play out is, it seems very likely that they will want to take passes in the early rounds. So, dragon deck. This is Demacia, right? So, you will be able to play dragons outside of Demacia, but in this case, what we're seeing is the Demacia Dragons deck, which is the most pushed archetype. In this deck, you're gonna... I mean, maybe you'll play the 2-mana 1/1... what's her called? Herald of Dragons? That kind of like sort of ramps your dragons and makes them cost 1 less. I think it's actually pretty likely you'll skip a lot of the early turns. I suspect Dragon Guard Lieutenant looks pretty good, but it actually might not make the cut at the end of the day. It'll be close. Egghead Researcher, 2/1/3. When I'm summoned, create a random dragon follower in hand. Hello. See, I mean, that looks a little bit better. Okay, yeah, this card could be all right. It's a decent, just like 2-drop if you're looking for a fluffy 2-drop that can be anti-aggro. See, I definitely do like this a little bit better. Because when you think about what dragons are and what their roles are, what a dragon deck is really just trying to do, well, we don't know exactly because we haven't seen Shyvana, we haven't seen the rest of the cards that are coming tomorrow. But from what we know currently about dragons and about how they're currently built, dragon decks will want to just kind of like start owning the game. So they're pure mid-range, right? They play a bunch of big cards starting early. They're going to do that in one of two ways. They're either going to play the Herald of Dragons, the 2-mana 1/1, kind of like the ramp card. And that's the last of the cards, so I can go ahead and, you know, pull up my game so I can show you guys the ramp card in case you don't know what I mean. But they'll play the 2-mana 1/1, and they'll be able to start playing the dragons early. They could play the 4-mana dragon on turn 3. They could play the 5-mana dragon on turn 4. We haven't seen this strategy be super competitive yet. It was for a little bit of time until people realized the 2-mana 1/1 card that summons dragons, or that makes dragons cheaper, kind of sucks. But that's just in the current card pool. If they add more dragons and more dragon synergy, there will be a point where if they add enough, the 2-mana 1/1 will be good. Let me go ahead and look at this name so that dragon. Oh, I was right. It was Herald of Dragons. There we go. All right, great. So the dragon archetype, how it plays is it either kind of wants to ramp and cheat those out early, or it'll like float or double float and cheat them out a little bit later. Like you could on you know, some of the later turns, like keeping the mana up for stuff like Dragon's Clutch is perfectly fine. Or just whatever spell you might want, like single combat in that deck, like double floating just so you can keep mana up for single combat is not bad, right? Because then on turn 3, you know, or you can just play Remembrance on turn 3, right? Because the way mid-range decks work in Legends of Runeterra is, especially a deck like this with Demacia, with, you know, kind of like stabilizing tools like single combat, a deck like this is kind of already beating aggro, usually, right? And especially because you can do some things in this deck, like you can threaten some very, very scary thing like Judgment. A lot of these decks can run because being able to cast it on Fused Firebrand, if you're worried about counterplay to Judgment, is actually kind of crazy, right? So you will see a lot of these Demacia Targon decks running Judgment, which is normally a very non-competitive card, but because you have the option to cast it on something like Spell Shield, that's scary. Aggro is going to have to watch out for that, right? So we're already good against aggro. We don't really need early dominance of the game. And we're also not trying to, like, kill the opponent early either, right? We, you know, depending on the meta, we could opt in for, you know, 1 or 2 additional kind of, like, helpers in the early game that don't hurt our late game matchups, right? That don't hurt our late game matchups. And that's kind of why when I look at these 2-drops, it really just comes down to how this playstyle goes. When I look at these 2-drops we see here, I like the idea of Egghead Researcher better than this other one, the 2-mana 3/2 Challenger. Because Egghead Researcher doesn't hurt your options against like some of the control games. We've seen so far from the dragons that we have seen, most of them are pretty good. Egghead Researcher shouldn't be able to... Okay, wait. This can get... So it can't get tokens, because when it says random, it can't get tokens. But it can get from other regions, which means this can always get Empyrean. Empyrean being... Here, I don't know why it's not loading. That's weird. Me when I'm picking out a watermelon with a giant egg. Yeah, Dragon Guard Lieutenant. It feels like a 2-mana 3/2 challenger is just not the playstyle that dragons want. And it's not like a, you know, nuts stat line or anything like that. It's not like what's the Mage Seeker Persecutor? Which is a card that in that specific archetype actually does get a lot of, yeah, Persuader is what he's called. The card in the archetype is kind of like a better version, although of course you can't play this early. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the dragon keyword and see what like random dragons we're gonna get. So obviously disregard anything that says dragons, that's not actually a dragon. Yeah, you'll get all the ones you think of as a dragon. You won't get Dragonling because it does not count tokens. And you will get a chance to get Empyrean. I know it doesn't say from any region, but they changed the way the text reads so that it's random region unless stated otherwise. They, like, you know, they reversed it. So in theory, you should be able to get Empyrean, which is interesting. Doesn't change too much. Empyrean's, honestly, it's an okay card if you want Dragon Synergy. So I could see this running as a 2-drop. Honestly, I could see just not running either. Dragons really don't need too many cards like this. This is a card to add if you're a little bit worried about aggro, basically. Like, if you want to be able to, you know, because a card like this is really good. You think of openers like they play Legion Saboteur on turn 1 and they're attacking on evens. Well, then Egghead Researcher is nuts, right? That's great. That's great. That's a bit of a narrow game state. But even if they're playing like Jagged Butcher, and even if you have to just kind of like tank it over 2 turns, that's all. For the most part, if you're not playing against aggro, or you're not worried about the aggro matchup at all, then Egghead Researcher is probably not even going to see play in decks either. So for the most part, I will say I don't expect... I do think that Stalking Broodmother, there's a chance this could hit decks if you just want more of the dragon tag. Honestly, you'd probably sooner just run Egghead Researcher if you wanted more of the dragon tag, right? It's kind of close. Stalking Broodmother. This card actually... 7 mana, 6/6 Fury Scout. Stalking Broodmother feels like it should be a 6 mana 5/6. Yeah, it feels like for 7 mana, this card is kind of crazy overpriced. Like, even if you do want the dragon keyword that much, it's just like Fury this late in the game. And even if, I mean, you could cheat it out early, but at the 7 mana point of the game, it's a little late for Fury. It's not going to do much. The opponent is going to chump it down. If this had like something like Overwhelm, we'd be singing a different tune potentially. It's too expensive. So yeah, I will say out of these new cards, it does look like these 3 dragon support cards don't have that much, you know, competitive long-term viability. But that's super hard to say without looking at the rest of the dragon package, right? So let's just, you know, breeze through them in a nutshell. Nox Kreia Arena is really interesting. Did you guys have any, like, interesting ideas in terms of ways to use this for value? Because I was thinking, you know, Garen, the awkward thing is this is 5 mana. That's, like, the super awkward thing about this card. It's exactly 5 mana. Keep in mind, landmarks, you can't use spell mana to play landmarks. These use unit mana. So, like, with Draven and Trundle, both of those are 5 mana cards. So, Nox Kreia Arena is clunkier with those than it really should be, right? Works with Draven? Yeah, it definitely will work with Draven. For sure. You can use it in dragons. I don't know if dragons... I mean, it does have some good synergy with some of the dragons. And there might actually be a second Noxus card that could lead to a different type of support. Usually when they build these archetypes, they do try to give them the ability to be played with other colors. So we definitely might see another Noxus support card like that would tie Noxus dragons together. But I don't think we have that yet. To level up for Garen and Fiora. Yeah, it's a big deal. Like, the fact that it's a level up tick for Garen is a big deal, but the fact that you're playing it, you'd have to play it on turn 6, basically. Or 5, depending on, like, what your board state is, and then sometimes it's the Garen you play on 6. But mostly, if you're playing Garen, you're playing this on turn 6. And the thing is, with a Fiora deck, well, current Fiora decks aren't built for Noxus. Noxus does actually have a lot of good cards for Fiora. A lot of people do underrate Fiora Noxus. Very, 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 very true. People do underrate Fiora Noxus. Whirling Death is a great card for Fiora, and Noxus does have some tricks to keep Fiora alive. And, you know, Fiora might need her second color a little bit less because, you know, maybe she's even using this, like, give an ally +2/+2 combat trick in an all-in Fiora deck, which is really cool. The problem is, though, that, I mean, it's pretty expensive, and Fiora decks, when you're playing a Fiora deck, you really don't want to, like, tap under too many options. Like, when you play this, you're tapping under stuff like Repost and giving yourself a turn where Fiora is going to be a little vulnerable. And, again, you know, Noxus is cute with Fiora, but not really what you want right now. It's not the best choice. You can run this with Shyvana Ash decks. Yeah, Frostbite stuff. For sure, for sure. Like, you can... Frostbite lasts until the end of the round. See, that's interesting. Intuitive. Wow, does this even work with Frostbite? So we're getting into territory here that's a little weird. Because this should work with Frostbite. But not in every case, right? It will last with Frostbite since it's round end. But Frostbite is also round end, right? Is there a clause in the game currently that the phrase round end happens before the phrase end of the round? They're the same phrase. Frostbite also is end of the round. I think it might be the case that some, like, order might matter or something like that. Is there an invisible stack somewhere for these effects? So what we do know is that whenever there is a case where things are both like round end or round start and they're on opposite sides of the board, there's a weird, I forget what it is, but I think it's like who passes first or something like that. Ends up being like whether it checks like round end first of that player or not. I do think, though, that this is probably designed to work with Frostbite. So, yeah, they might have to make it so that round end is a little bit different. I do think we're at the point in the game where there's so many of these, like, round end and round start effects that they will have to clarify and kind of, like, standardize what, like, the order in which happens. Because there's a few different kinds of logics, right? It's like sometimes it goes left to right, sometimes it goes like who passes first. Sometimes it happens all at the same time. It's a little weird. It's not really like super standardized. But either way, Noxcrea Arena definitely has potential. One of the better landmarks for sure. If it didn't cost exactly 5 mana, I could see it having much more potential. Scorched Earth is going to be a cute gimmicky card at the start, but I don't expect landmarks to be as long-term competitive enough. So I do think this card will ultimately be long-term a bit worse than something like Noxian Guillotine. Stony Suppressor, I love this card. I think this is a really cool card to have in a card game. You can do a lot of cool things with it. Demacia will be running at a decent amount. And it will certainly nerf a lot of decks like Lee Sin, although I'm pretty sure they're not just printing this card to nerf Lee Sin. I'm pretty sure Lee Sin is getting nerfed in some other ways. So that's fine. Sharp Sight. I do think that card's going to be pretty competitive. One of the more competitive combat tricks I've seen. It's right on the level. This, like, we'll see experimentation, we'll hit decks, we'll see cuts, and then we'll see re-adds, right? This is, like, kind of, like, right on the edge of, like, whether it makes decks or not. Stalking Broodmother, a little bit weak for dragons. At the end of the day, when there's dragon synergy, you know, maybe Shyvana gives all your dragons Overwhelm, in which this card could be maybe kind of crazy. I could see a weird world where that happens. But overall, it seems a little bit unlikely that this card, like, even if you're really thirsty for the dragon tag, there's probably slightly better ways to get it. Dragon Guard Lieutenant, it's alright, a little bit better. I would guess it's not the kind of playstyle that Dragon's gonna want, but it does come down to the meta a lot, right? Here, the problem with Dragon Guard Lieutenant is actually very, very simple. Which, I didn't even say this before, but the problem with this card is that 2-3 is not a good stat line for challengers in this current, the way we see cards in game. Like, or sorry, a 3-2. Like, when you look at Hired Gun is the Bilgewater 2-3 make a thing vulnerable, which isn't exactly Challenger, but it's kind of like Challenger when you think about how it works in the early stages of the game, is a much better card, because you can kill a weak thing and then survive to play again. Whereas Dragon Guard Lieutenant, when you have a 3-2 stat line, you're doing one of a few things. You're killing 1-3s, which are really uncommon, 1-3 stat line. Now, Eye of the Dragon is a 1-3. And you'll also notice there's a new 1-3 in town, Stony Suppressor, which you can kill for free, which is nice. And there's also a new 1-3, which is Egghead Researcher, which you can also kill, which is nice. But I don't think, I mean, Eye of the Dragon, I think, is probably going to see a little bit less play. It's not a super threat for this deck. Egghead, even if people are playing it, which they might, it's not a big, like, it's not a huge deal, like, removing that for free. It's just like a chump blocker at that point. It might as well be a 1-1 in that kind of deck with this kind of deck. That's the biggest problem with this card, is that it's a 3-2 and not a 2-3. A 3-2 is also better at killing something like a 4-3, which we do see in, like, Ballista currently people are running. Callista people used to run. Ash, if they don't have protection, but any deck that's running a 5-3 is going to have protection for it. That's the biggest problem with a card like this, is that a 3-2 is just not that good of a stat line for an early game challenger. So it has some potential. Egghead Researcher, think of this like an anti-aggro tech. Now, I mentioned already, dragons don't really need help against aggro the way they're currently built, so why would you run Egghead Researcher over Dragon Guard Lieutenant, right? Because I said specifically, like, dragons don't really need help in terms of, like, that early game dominance, so Dragon Guard Lieutenant might make less sense than Egghead Researcher. And the reason is just because Egghead Researcher is more flexible, just because it is a card that generates another card that's going to be valuable. All the dragon followers are big cards, so this won't generate, like, a super cheap card. If you top deck this on, like, turn 6 or 7 into the game, you actually have decent odds. Not great. If you top deck it on, like, turn 7, you have decent odds of just playing it, and then on that turn being able to then, you know, play your curve out pretty well with your dragon. There's a 4 dragon, there's a couple 5 dragons. So it feels pretty viable, but you're really only running this if you are looking for, like, anti-aggro tech that is non-committal. That's the best kind of tech, where it's like, it helps your aggro matchup by just being a turn 2 play, but it doesn't hurt your other matchups too bad, right? So that's why this card is pretty great. It's like, it doesn't have a flop matchup, you know? That's it. So yeah, it looks pretty good, but we're gonna have to see what the random pool is. Anyway, that's it for my my initial impressions of these cards. Looking pretty good. Can't wait to see Shyvana tomorrow and exactly what she does.